50, 80, 100, 120, 140. That's $200.
Hey, that's mine. Why are you... I didn't do anything wrong.
Your tone. One more word and I can take you in for assaulting an officer. You want that?
That moment right there, that was the beginning of the end for Officer Marcus Bennett, but he didn't know it yet. He had no idea that every word he just spoke, every move he just made, was being recorded. He had no idea that Internal Affairs had been watching him for 6 weeks straight, and he definitely had no idea that in just a few hours, his entire world, everything he'd built over 15 years, was going to come crashing down in the most devastating way possible. This is the story of how one corrupt cop finally faced justice, and I promise you, it's going to shake you. Before we dive into this story, I need you to do something for me. Right now, wherever you are in the world, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you believe that people should be judged by their character, not their skin, or hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear is a true story about what happens. It was a Tuesday morning on Riverside Avenue, a neighborhood where most of the faces were black and brown, where people worked hard just to get by, where trust in the police had been broken so many times that it felt like shattered glass cutting into the community's soul. Marcus Bennett had just pulled over his third car that morning, and just like the first two, he had no real reason. No broken taillight, no speeding, no swerving, just the color of the driver's skin. That was enough for Marcus. It had always been enough. He was a 15-year veteran of the Westbrook Police Department. 15 years of wearing that badge like it was armor, like it made him invincible, like it put him above the very laws he was supposed to enforce. Oh, and for a long time it seemed like he was right. Marcus had learned the game. He knew exactly which reports to file, which words to use in his statements, which cameras to avoid, or so he thought. He had it all figured out. Pull someone over in certain neighborhoods, search their car, find cash, pocket it. If they complained, threaten them. Most people were too scared to fight back against a cop. Who would believe them anyway? For years, this system worked perfectly for Marcus Bennett. He got away with it over and over again. He felt untouchable. But something was changing in Westbrook. Something Marcus didn't see coming. 8 months before that Tuesday morning, a new police chief walked through the doors of the Westbrook Police Department. His name was Captain Daniel Rivera, and he came with a reputation. He was known as a reformer, also a man who didn't tolerate dirty cops, a leader who believed that trust between police and community was sacred, and he was willing to do whatever it took to restore it. Captain Rivera started hearing complaints about Marcus Bennett almost immediately. Citizens would come into his office with the same kind of stories. They'd been pulled over for no reason. Money went missing from their wallets during the stop. They were threatened when they tried to speak up. And every time, it was the same officer, Marcus Bennett. But here's the thing about Marcus. He was clever. Every stop had a report. Every incident had paperwork. Suspected drug activity. Erratic driving. Matched a description. The documentation always looked clean on the surface. But Captain Rivera had been doing this for 30 years. He knew what a dirty cop looked like. Now he could smell it. And Marcus Bennett reeked of corruption. So Rivera did something that would change everything. He assigned 2 internal affairs investigators to watch Marcus closely, not just review his reports. Really watch him, follow his patterns, interview every person who'd filed a complaint, build a real case. And what they found was chilling. Marcus always worked the same neighborhoods, always pulled over the same type of people. His reports always used identical language, like he had a template. And most damning of all, dozens of people reported having cash go missing during encounters with him, but there was never any mention of seized money in his official reports. The money just disappeared, right into Marcus's pockets. The investigators knew they had patterns, they had complaints, they had testimonies, but they needed more. Complaints alone wouldn't be enough to fire a cop with 15 years on the force and a union ready to defend him. They needed evidence that couldn't be denied. They needed video. Marcus had a habit, you see. He would disable his dashboard camera. He'd claim it malfunctioned. He'd say he forgot to turn it on. It happened so often it was suspicious on its own, but no one had been able to prove he was doing it intentionally. Then the department upgraded their camera systems. And this is where it gets beautiful. The new cameras had a backup recording system, a secondary system that Marcus didn't know about. even when the main camera appeared to be off, this hidden system kept recording. Everything, every stop, every word, every action. But the tech team quietly installed one of these new cameras in Marcus's patrol car 3 months before that Tuesday morning. They told him it was just the old camera, refurbished. Marcus didn't think twice about it. He kept doing what he'd always done, disabling what he thought was the only camera. But for 6 weeks, Internal Affairs watched everything. And what they saw was worse than they'd imagined. They watched Marcus pull over a young black man named Devin Carter, who was driving perfectly within the law. They watched Marcus order him out of the car without any legal justification. They watched him search the vehicle and find $200 in the glove compartment, Devin's rent money. They watched Marcus count it slowly, look around to make sure no one was watching, and slip it into his own pocket. When Devin protested, Marcus's response was ice cold. "One more word, and I can take you in for assaulting an officer. You want that?" Devin went silent. What choice did he have? It was his word against a cop's word, and everybody knew how that story ended. They watched Marcus stop an elderly black woman named Mrs. Patterson, who was driving exactly the speed limit, doing everything right. Marcus claimed her taillight was out. It wasn't. He made her sit on the side of the road for 40 minutes while he sat in his car doing nothing, just to make her late, just to exert his power, just to remind her who was in control. When Mrs. Patterson finally asked if she could leave, Marcus gave her a ticket for an expired registration. Her registration wasn't expired. She had the current sticker right there on her windshield. Marcus didn't care. Well, he just wanted to punish her for having the audacity to question him. They watched Marcus pull over a Latino teenager named Carlos Mendez. For 20 minutes, they watched Marcus berate this kid, call him slurs I won't repeat here, tell him to go back where he came from. Carlos was born in Westbrook. His parents were born in Westbrook. His grandparents had lived in Westbrook for 40 years. But Marcus didn't care about facts. He just wanted to make Carlos feel small, scared, unwelcome in his own hometown. The footage went on and on, week after week of abuse, theft, racial profiling, harassment. It was all there, recorded in high definition, time-stamped, undeniable. Internal Affairs built a case so solid that even Marcus's union wouldn't be able to save him. Captain Rivera wanted to do this right. No, he didn't want Marcus to just quietly resign and pop up at another police department in another city, terrorizing a different community. He wanted Marcus fired, officially terminated for cause. He wanted it on the record so Marcus Bennett could never wear a badge again. They compiled everything into a report. Over 300 pages of documentation, 47 separate incidents caught on camera, testimony from 32 different citizens, bank records showing deposits into Marcus's personal account that didn't match his salary, deposits that perfectly matched the amounts of cash that had gone missing during traffic stops. It was all there, a mountain of evidence that couldn't be explained away. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. Marcus was told to report to Captain Rivera's office. He wasn't told why. This wasn't unusual. Chiefs called officers in for meetings all the time. Marcus figured it was about some case or maybe a new policy. He wasn't worried at all. He walked into the building that morning like he owned the place, grabbed coffee from the break room, joked with another officer about last night's football game. Completely relaxed, completely confident. He had no idea what was waiting for him. When Marcus walked into Rivera's office, the first thing he noticed was how crowded it was. The chief was there, obviously. But so were 2 internal affairs investigators, a representative from Human Resources, and a union representative. Marcus's stomach dropped. Something was very wrong. Captain Rivera didn't waste time with pleasantries. He told Marcus to sit down. Then he slid the 300-page report across the desk. The room went silent as Marcus picked it up and started flipping through the pages. His face went from confused to pale to bright red. He started to speak, but Rivera held up his hand. Rivera told him everything. About the secret camera, about the 6 weeks of surveillance, about the 47 incidents, about the testimony from citizens, about the bank records that proved the theft. Marcus tried to interrupt several times, tried to defend himself, tried to explain. But Rivera kept talking, calmly and methodically destroying every excuse before Marcus could even fully form it. Then Rivera did something Marcus didn't expect. He turned on the monitor in his office and started playing the footage. Marcus had to sit there and watch himself steal Devin's rent money, Watch himself use racial slurs against Carlos. Watch himself abuse his power over and over and over again. Watch himself become the villain in his own story. Marcus tried everything. He claimed the footage was edited. Rivera pulled out the original files with timestamps and metadata proving nothing had been altered. Marcus claimed he was acting on reasonable suspicion. Rivera pulled out legal briefs from the department's attorneys, explaining exactly why each stop violated the Fourth Amendment, why each search was illegal, why every single thing Marcus did was wrong. Marcus claimed the money he pocketed was his own money that he already had in his pocket. Rivera pulled out bank records showing he'd deposited exactly $200 on the same day as the Devin Carter stop, and testimony from Devin proving that was his rent money, complete with his landlord's receipt. Every defense Marcus tried to throw up was torn down with cold, hard evidence. The union representative sat there quietly. Even he knew there was nothing he could do. This case was too tight, too solid, no wiggle room, no technicality to exploit, no way out. After 2 hours of methodically going through the evidence, Captain Rivera finally said the words Marcus had been dreading. Marcus Bennett, effective immediately, you are terminated from the Westbrook Police Department. Marcus was required to turn in his badge, his gun, his uniform, and all department property right then and there. Security would escort him to his locker, watch him clean it out, and walk him out of the building. He was banned from all department property, and the case was being referred to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Marcus's face went through every emotion in seconds: shock, anger, fear, panic. He tried one more time to argue, his voice getting louder, more desperate. Captain Rivera remained perfectly calm. If you don't comply immediately, you will be arrested for trespassing. The union representative finally spoke, but only to tell Marcus to do what they said. Even the union knew this was a lost cause. 2 security officers entered the room. Marcus stood up slowly. His hands were shaking. The man who had walked into this building an hour ago like he owned the place now looked small and defeated. He took off his badge and placed it on the desk. The badge he'd worn for 15 years, the badge he'd hidden behind while he terrorized his own community. He unholstered his weapon, removed the magazine, cleared the chamber, and placed it next to the badge. The walk to his locker was the longest walk of Marcus Bennett's life. Other officers stopped what they were doing to watch. Word had already spread through the building like wildfire. Everyone knew what was happening. Some officers looked satisfied. They'd known Marcus was dirty and were glad to see him gone. Others looked uncomfortable, probably thinking about their own questionable stops, their own corner cutting, wondering if they'd covered their tracks well enough. A few looked genuinely scared, probably wondering if they were next. Marcus opened his locker with security standing right behind him. He pulled out his personal items, some family photos, a spare shirt, a coffee mug that said "World's Best Dad." He threw everything into a cardboard box. One of the security officers took his locker key. The other placed a new lock on the locker to prevent him from ever coming back. Then came the walk out of the building. The same path Marcus had walked hundreds of times over 15 years. Past the front desk where he used to joke with the receptionist, past the briefing room where he'd sat through countless roll calls, past the dispatch center where he'd reported his location 1,000 times. Everyone watching, everyone knowing. When they reached the front door, the security officers stopped. One of them spoke in a flat, professional tone. "You need to leave the property immediately and never return." Marcus just nodded. He couldn't even speak. His throat was too tight. He walked out into the parking lot, got into his personal car, and just sat there for a long moment, staring at nothing. 15 years, gone in one morning. His career, his reputation, his power, all of it stripped away because he thought he was untouchable, because he thought the badge made him immune to consequences. He was wrong. But the story doesn't end there. Captain Rivera had one more move to make. That same afternoon, Rivera held a press conference. He stood in front of cameras from every local news station and several national outlets. Reporters packed the room, sensing this was big. Rivera didn't name Marcus directly at first, but he announced that an officer had been terminated for serious misconduct, including racial profiling, theft, and abuse of power under color of law. He explained that the department had conducted an extensive investigation and gathered overwhelming evidence. He stated clearly that the case had been referred to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Then Rivera did something that shocked everyone, something that most police departments never do. He released some of the footage to the public. Not all of it. Some was being held for the criminal case. But enough. Edited clips showing Marcus stealing Devin's money, clips of him using racial slurs against Carlos, clips of him harassing Mrs. Patterson for no reason. The footage went viral within hours. It was on every news channel, every social media platform. Millions of views, thousands of shares. Everyone in Westbrook was talking about it. And because Rivera had released it officially, Marcus couldn't hide. His name came out. His photo came out. Everyone knew who he was and what he'd done. The community response was massive and immediate. People who had been victimized by Marcus for years finally felt heard. Yet they came forward with more stories, more incidents, more evidence. The district attorney's office was flooded with complaints and testimony. Marcus hired a lawyer, a good one, expensive, but even his lawyer knew the situation was nearly impossible. The evidence was too strong. The video didn't lie. The bank records didn't lie. The testimony from dozens of citizens all corroborated what the video showed. 3 weeks after Marcus was fired, the district attorney filed formal charges. Multiple counts of theft, multiple counts of deprivation of rights under color of law. Official misconduct, the charges carried serious prison time if convicted. Marcus's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA wasn't interested in going easy. Not with this much evidence, not with this much public attention, and not with this many victims demanding justice. The preliminary hearing was packed. Victims filled the courtroom. Devin was there, Mrs. Patterson was there, Carlos was there. Community activists were there, the media was there, cameras rolling. Marcus sat at the defense table looking nothing like the confident cop who used to patrol Riverside Avenue. He looked tired, scared, broken. The judge reviewed the evidence and ruled there was more than enough for the case to go to trial. Bond was set at $50,000. Marcus's wife had to put up their house to get him out. His life was completely falling apart. He couldn't find work. Everyone in the city knew his face. His own neighbors avoided him. His kids were getting bullied at school because of what their dad had done. His wife started talking about divorce. Everything he'd built over 15 years was crumbling like sand. Meanwhile, Captain Rivera was working to repair the damage Marcus and others like him had done to community trust. He started holding town halls in the neighborhoods that had been most affected by police misconduct. He listened to complaints without getting defensive. He instituted new training programs focused on constitutional policing and implicit bias. He installed cameras in all patrol cars that couldn't be disabled. No more malfunctions. He created an independent civilian review board to investigate complaints against officers. The message to the other officers in the department was loud and clear. The old way of doing things is over. If you're dirty, you will be caught. If you abuse your power, you will be fired. If you break the law, you will be prosecuted. So no more looking the other way. No more protecting bad cops. 3 other officers quietly resigned in the weeks following Marcus's firing. They saw the writing on the wall and decided to leave before investigations into their own conduct went too far. Rivera let them go without a fight, happy to have them out of his department. The trial took 4 months to begin. When it finally started, it lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented their case methodically and devastatingly. Video after video, witness after witness, bank records, phone records, forensic analysis, expert testimony, everything. Marcus's defense tried to argue that he was just doing his job, that the stops were legitimate, that he never stole anything, that the witnesses were lying or misremembering. But every argument fell flat against the mountain of evidence. And the jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. They came back with guilty verdicts on almost every count. The courtroom erupted in applause. People were crying, hugging each other. The judge had to call for order multiple times. Marcus just sat there staring at the table, knowing what was coming next. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge gave a speech about the sacred trust that law enforcement officers hold and how Marcus had violated that trust in the worst possible way. He talked about how Marcus had used his badge not to protect and serve, but to terrorize and steal. How he'd targeted the most vulnerable people in the community. How he'd betrayed everything the badge was supposed to represent. Then he handed down the sentence. 8 years in state prison. No early release eligibility. Marcus would have to serve at least 6 years before he could even be considered for parole. Marcus was handcuffed right there in the courtroom. The same handcuffs he'd used on so many people over his career. He was let out through the same criminal justice system he'd fed people into for 15 years. But now, he was on the other side of it. The victims who attended the sentencing felt something they hadn't felt in years when dealing with the police. Justice. Real justice. Not a cop getting a paid suspension and coming back 6 months later. Not a department closing ranks and protecting their own. Not a quiet resignation and a fresh start in another city. Actual accountability. Captain Rivera attended the sentencing. Afterward, he spoke to the media again. "This case shows that no one is above the law," he said, looking directly into the cameras. Not even those who are supposed to enforce it. Especially not those who are supposed to enforce it. The case became a landmark example for police departments across the country. It was used in training academies as a cautionary tale. The footage was shown to new recruits with a simple message. This is what a bad cop looks like, and this is what happens to bad cops in our department. Marcus served his time in a state prison 3 hours away from Westbrook. Prison is hard for anyone, but it's especially hard for former police officers. The other inmates knew what he was. He had to be kept in protective custody for his own safety, 23 hours a day in a cell, alone, with nothing but time to think about how he got there, all those people he'd harassed, all that money he'd stolen, all those racial slurs, all that abuse of power. It had felt so easy in the moment, so safe. He'd truly believed he would never face consequences, and that belief had destroyed his entire life. His wife divorced him while he was in prison, filed the papers 8 months into his sentence. His kids stopped visiting after the first year. It was too painful for them to see their father behind bars, to reconcile the dad they'd known with the man on those videos. His parents were the only ones who kept in contact, and even they were ashamed of what he'd done. His mother would visit once a month, and they'd sit across from each other in the visitation room, struggling to find words that could bridge the gap between who Marcus used to be and who he'd become. Meanwhile, back in Westbrook, things were slowly getting better. Community trust in the police was improving. People felt more comfortable filing complaints because they'd seen that those complaints would be taken seriously. Officers were treating people with more respect because they knew they were being watched and that there would be real consequences for misconduct. Captain Rivera's reforms became a model for other departments. Other cities started reaching out, asking how Westbrook had turned things around. Other police chiefs started implementing similar camera systems that couldn't be disabled. Other internal affairs divisions started being more proactive instead of just reactive. It wasn't a perfect transformation. Change never is. There were still problems. There were still questionable stops. There were still officers who needed more training or more accountability. But the trajectory had shifted. The culture was changing, and Marcus's case had proven that change was possible, that accountability was possible, that justice was possible. Devin Carter, the young man Marcus had stolen $200 from, got to testify at the trial. He got his money back as part of the restitution ordered by the judge. But more than that, he got something he thought he'd never get. Validation. Someone in power had finally listened to him, finally believed him, finally did something about it. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who'd been harassed and given a false ticket, received an official apology from the department. Captain Rivera met with her personally, told her what had happened to Marcus, told her about the reforms being implemented. She cried during that meeting, not from sadness, but from relief, then from hope. Carlos Mendez, the teenager who'd been verbally abused and dehumanized, got to watch Marcus being led away in handcuffs at the sentencing. He told reporters afterward that it was the first time he'd felt safe in Westbrook in years, the first time he believed the system could work. These small moments of justice mattered more than anyone could measure. They showed that the system could work when people in power chose to do the right thing, when a police chief chose to investigate instead of ignore, when a district attorney chose to prosecute instead of protect, when a community chose to speak up instead of stay silent. Marcus Bennett's story is a reminder that actions have consequences, that badges don't grant immunity, that racism and corruption can be challenged and defeated. It took time. It took effort. It took courage from victims to come forward knowing they might not be believed. It took integrity from Captain Rivera to pursue the case, even when it would have been easier to let it slide. It took a community demanding better and refusing to accept the status quo. But in the end, a racist, corrupt cop found out he wasn't untouchable. He found out that the power he'd abused could be taken away. He found out that the system he'd manipulated could be used against him. He found out that justice, though sometimes slow, could eventually arrive. His firing wasn't just the end of his career. It was the beginning of real change in a department that desperately needed it. Every officer who witnessed what happened to Marcus understood the message. Do your job with integrity. Treat people with respect. Or follow the law you're sworn to uphold, or face the same fate. That Tuesday morning, when Marcus walked into Captain Rivera's office, he thought he was untouchable. 2 hours later, he walked out without a badge, without a gun, without a career, and without a future in law enforcement. And eventually, he walked into a prison cell where he had plenty of time to think about every bad choice that led him there. The neighborhood on Riverside Avenue, where Marcus used to patrol and terrorize, eventually got a new officer assigned to it. Officer Sarah Chen. She actually got out of her car and talked to people, actually responded to real crimes instead of inventing them, actually served and protected instead of terrorizing and stealing. And slowly, cautiously, about people in that neighborhood started to believe again that maybe, just maybe, the police could be what they were supposed to be. That's what happened when one racist, corrupt cop found out he was fired. But more importantly, that's what happened when a police chief decided enough was enough, when a community demanded justice, and when a system, broken for so long, finally worked the way it was supposed to. This story isn't just about one bad cop getting what he deserved, though that's certainly part of it. It's about what's possible when people refuse to accept injustice as inevitable, when leaders choose courage over convenience, when communities hold power accountable instead of being crushed by it. Marcus Bennett spent 15 years believing he was above the law. It took 6 weeks of surveillance, 300 pages of evidence, and the courage of dozens of victims to prove him wrong. He's sitting in a prison cell today because Devin Carter was brave enough to testify, because Mrs. Patterson was willing to share her story, because Carlos Mendez refused to let what happened to him be swept under the rug. And he's sitting in that cell because Captain Daniel Rivera decided that protecting bad cops was less important than protecting the community. That's the real story here. The badge doesn't make you untouchable, power doesn't make you immune, and justice, when fought for hard enough, is possible. Remember that. Please, be kind to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one.